Now, my conversion ultimately led me to the monastery and to a life of prayer. You know, I said it simply and directly one time. I said, my vocation is prayer. My vocation is prayer. I don't know if I've ever prayed, but I have desired to pray. The great desire for God, the desire for prayer, has been at the heart of everything else in my life. It's been the desire within every other desire, and the longing within every other longing of my life. Now, there's something very, very mysterious about this desire for God in our lives. And there are so many ways that we attempt to respond to this deep desire. Sometimes knocking on wrong doors. But my way as a monk was to live a very disciplined life of communal and liturgical prayer at the monastery of Gethsemane. Prayer is built into the very structure of the life here. Structured monastic prayer many times a day, and that's definitely a grace. At the monastery, you pray not when you feel like it, but when the bell rings, you go to prayer. Despite my struggles, particularly with my abbot, I loved my life as a Trappist monk and the prayer that was supported by that way of life. Now, as the years went on, I wrote in so many ways about prayer and meditation. So many books and essays. Eventually, a question came to me which captured something essential about prayer and meditation. It is a question that in some ways perhaps sounds like a Zen koan. I kept asking myself this question: what if the door to paradise is wide open and we walk right past it? What if the door to paradise, the door to intimacy with God, is wide open and we walk right past it? Because we walk right past our own lives and our own hearts and right past the world of God's presence, which is all around us. The seeds of contemplation, the kernels of the truth of God's presence are everywhere. The door to paradise is wide open and awaits us at the heart of every moment and every event. Now you know, my desire for God alone, my desire to disappear into the secret of God's face, led me to the monastery, and even here in the monastery, toward even more silence and solitude, and eventually to a hermitage where I could disappear. The hermitage was a place in which I could disappear from the world. It's like, as the Zen people say, to be one with everyone, I have to become no one. To be present to everybody, I have to become a nobody. A nobody. Well, you may think, oh, this is all fine and good, but what was my life of prayer really like? Well, it's hard to talk about. But one time, some friends of mine down in South America asked me to tell them what a typical day of a life of prayer in the hermitage was like. What the day of a stranger, the day of a nobody was like. I somewhat playfully wrote this to them. I wrote, now, all monks, as is well known, are unmarried. And hermits are more unmarried than the rest of them. Not that I have anything against women, but you might say that I have decided to marry the silence of the forest. The sweet warmth of the whole world will have to be my wife. Here in the hermitage up in the woods, Here in the hermitage is the silent, loving prayer, which is at the center of all other loves and is at the root of all the secrets that are whispered by all the lovers in their beds all over the world. But lest all this hermitage stuff sound too elite or spiritually superior to ordinary life, let me just say this. I continued writing to my friends in South America, and I said, this is not a hermitage, it is just a house. Who is that hermitage I seen you with last night? What I wear is pants. What I do is live. How I pray is breathe. Who said Zen? Wash out your mouth if you said Zen. Am I here waiting in ambush for some exalted meditation? If you see a meditation going by, shoot it. Who said love? Love is in the movies. Up here in the woods. Up here in the woods in the hermitage is seen the New Testament. That is to say, the wind comes through the trees and you breathe it. Yes, I know. And all that I know is that my call to prayer and solitude is an invitation to recognize and embrace the great love that is hidden in the depths of all that is real. When we are most loving, we are most real and most alive. And when we are less loving, we are less real and less alive. I came here to the hermitage to realize that all of life is about learning how to fall in love, learning how to let love claim our hearts. I came here to realize that God's love wants all of us. All of us. And when God's love has all of us, we will at last be free. Free to be our true selves. This is what brought me to the hermitage.
As I mentioned earlier, it was while I was living with Forster Batterham in a cottage on Staten Island, and I found out that I was pregnant with my daughter, that I was surprised that I was beginning to pray, and pray daily. I began to pray just because I had to, and I just found myself praying. When I was walking to the village to get the mail, I'd find myself praying, holding the rosary in my pocket that Mary Gordon gave me when I was in New Orleans. Oh, I knew I probably wasn't praying it right, but I kept saying it because it made me happy. But then I would think scornfully, here you are in a stupor of content. You are biological, like a cow. Prayer with you is like the opiate of the people. And over in my mind, that phrase would be repeated jeeringly. Prayer is the opiate of the people. And then I would reason with myself, but I'm praying because I'm happy, not because I'm unhappy. I didn't turn to God in unhappiness, in grief, or in despair. I didn't turn to God to get consolation, to get anything from God. And encouraged that I was praying because I wanted to thank God, I kept on praying. And no matter how dull the day, how long the walk seemed, if I felt low at the beginning of the walk, the words I had been saying insinuated themselves into my heart, so that on the trip back I neither prayed nor thought, but was just filled with exultation. I wrote one time that I must write about prayer because it is as necessary to life as breathing. It is food and drink. And I had to write about it because those of us at the Catholic Worker, well, we were surrounded by the lame and the blind, the utterly destitute, and sometimes it seemed to be a hopeless situation, and we could do so little. Remember, I wrote one time that I must write about prayer because it is necessary to life as breathing. And it takes a lot of prayer in order to be able to continue doing the works of mercy. feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, clothing the naked. One time Robert Coles followed me around for weeks with a tape recorder, recording everything I said. And I told him one time that if the young people who had come to visit us did not leave, knowing the value that we place on prayer, then we had failed. Prayer was always an important part of the Catholic worker daily schedule. Everybody who could went to Mass daily, including myself. In the evening we read the Psalms, and during the days there were short visits to the church and individual rosaries were said. Yes, prayer was a very important part of Catholic worker life. Because I believe if we bring enough of the power of prayer to it, things will fall in line. Work will get done. The rough ways will be made plain. Mountains will be leveled. And so we prayed. We prayed before we fed the hungry. We prayed with those that we sheltered. We prayed when we protested, and we prayed when we were jailed for protesting. We prayed when we marched with those marching for civil rights. We prayed when we marched with the workers in the vineyards. Yes, we prayed, and we prayed, and we prayed. Because I believe that the one lesson which is reiterated over and over again is that we are one. And we pray to be one. We want to love and suffer for each other. We are flesh, one family. And God is our Father, giving us what we ask, bread, not a stone, life, not death, freely with love, not because we deserve it. God will save us in spite of ourselves, because Christ has once and for all overcome death. So let us pray and do penance in each little way that is offered through the days. And yes, then God will give us a heart of flesh to take away our heart of stone. And with prayers, we can save all those who are dying each day, knowing that God will wipe away all tears from their eyes.
I remember a special bright and shining moment. You know, those moments in which we glimpse the depths of our lives. Moments that are woven universally into our lives. I remember one of those moments of awakening for me. For me, it was like a moment of waking up from a dream of separateness. Like waking up from a dream of separateness. You know, a life of prayer starts to enlarge our hearts toward divine proportions of love and compassion, to the place where God is all in all, toward the place where God's love for all people and our love for all people starts becoming one love. One love. What can I say? It was like waking up from a dream of separateness. I realized that there are no strangers. God doesn't make strangers. We do. You see, ironically, in some ways, one of my greatest prayer experiences was after almost 20 years of monastic life, and it wasn't even in the monastery. It was at a busy intersection, downtown Louisville, Kentucky, where I went to a doctor's appointment, at 4th and Walnut to be exact. I wrote about the experience in my diary. I wrote, in Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the busy shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all those people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking up from a dream of separateness, of phony self-isolation in a special monastic religious world, a world of renunciation and supposed holiness. The whole illusion of a separated holy existence is a dream. I realized that just being an ordinary human being was like getting the news that one holds a winning ticket to a cosmic sweepstakes. If only everybody could realize all this. But it cannot be explained. There's no way of telling people that they're all walking around shining like the sun. There are no strangers in God's presence. Then it was as if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts, the depths of their hearts, the core of their reality, the person each one is in God's eyes. If only they could see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. And then I saw and realized that there is in each of us a virginal point of light that belongs to God alone, which is in everybody. But I have no program for this seeing. It is only given. But the gate of heaven is everywhere. The gate of heaven is everywhere.
I remember one day during the seaman strike in the mid-30s, I was waiting for the traffic light to change, and I was on my way to the Seamen's Defense Committee headquarters. I was idly saying my rosary, which I was usually doing. The rosary is always handy in my pocket. And as usual, the recitation was more or less automatic. When suddenly, like a bright light, like a joyful thought, the words, "Our Father," pierced my heart. To all those who were about me, to all the passers-by, to the longshoremen idling about the corner, black and white, to the striking seamen I was going to see, I realized I was akin. For we're all children of a common Father, all creatures of one Creator, Catholic or Protestant, Jew or Christian, communist or non-Christian, we are bound together by this tie. We can't escape the recognition of the fact that we are all brothers and sisters. Whether or not one believes in Jesus Christ, His incarnation, His life here with us, His crucifixion and resurrection, whether or not one believes in God, the fact remains that we are all children of the one Creator. And the work we must do then is to strive for peace and harmony rather than hatred and strife. Oh, you know that the striving towards peace and harmony was never more evident to me than during the Depression. That's when this recognizing that I was akin to everyone was so hard to bear. I remember during the mid-30s, every morning about 400 men came to Mott Street. The radio was cheerful, the smell of coffee was a good smell, the air of the morning was fresh and not too cold. But my heart was bleeding as I passed the lines of men in front of the store, which was our headquarters. The place was packed. Not another man could get in, so they had to form a line outside. We hated those lines. But the breakfast which we served, cottage cheese, rye bread, and coffee, brought about a line. It was an eyesore to the community. The little Italian village, which was Mott Street and Hester Street, a little community within the great city, had been invaded by the Bowery, by the hosts of unemployed men, by no means derelicts, who were trying to keep body and soul together while they looked for work. It was so very hard to say matter-of-factly and cheerfully, "Good morning," as we passed on our way to Mass. And it was even hardest to say Merry Christmas or Happy New Year during the holiday time. To these men with despair and patient misery written on many of their faces. No, I felt more like taking their hands and saying, "Forgive us. Let us forgive each other. All of us who are more comfortable, who have a place to sleep, 3 meals a day, work to do, we are responsible for your condition. We are guilty of each other's sins. We must bear each other's burdens. Forgive us, and may God forgive us all."
You know, I once said, "Let no one seek a life of private peace and private individual wholeness through prayer and contemplation." Prayer doesn't always bring private peace and contentment. Because at times prayer awakens tragic questions in the ground of the heart, like wounds that will not stop bleeding. Tragic questions in the ground of the heart, like wounds that will not stop bleeding. And one of those tragic questions and one of those open wounds coming out of my life of prayer was to realize the tragedy of a world perpetually at war and using violence at every turn. I had been surrounded by war for 50 years. I had been born in the midst of a war. I entered the monastery in the midst of another war. My brother died in a war. War. As I woke up from my dream of private monastic separateness, I came to realize that the Christian must be dedicated to the total abolition of war and violence. Yes, I realized that the Christian must, to their greatest ability, be dedicated to the total abolition of war and violence. The roots of war must be unmasked in our own hearts and in the world around us. After my experience that day at 4th and Walnut, I started, you might say, turning toward the larger world around me. I was irresistibly drawn to start writing to Dorothy Day and to the others at the Catholic worker community. Dorothy Day. I once wrote to her in utter truth, and I said that if it hadn't been for her and the Catholic worker form of witness, I might never have joined the Catholic Church. Oh, Dorothy. Both of us so different, yet so much the same. Her name was synonymous with engagement with the world, while my name was synonymous with withdrawal from the world. She the active one, and me the so-called contemplative one. And yet we were both so similar. Both of us were converts. Both of us had wild bohemian youths. And both of us had a wounded experience with our own sexuality that left us with deep shame. things we never talked or wrote about very much during our lifetime. Her sexual relationships and a much regretted abortion. And me fathering a child while I was a student at Cambridge. In many ways, it was inevitable that she and I would feel ourselves drawn to start to communicate with each other. We shared so much in common. I wrote letters to her, almost like my confessor.
It was interesting. Our pacifist stance, our speaking out against war, that turned out to be the least acceptable part of the philosophy of the Catholic worker. Yes, people supported us as long as we were doing the works of mercy. But some turned away from us when we began to write against war. I had to write against war. You see, I had a hard time understanding how any Christians could agree with using force to conquer force. I'm against war because it is contrary to the Spirit of Jesus Christ. And the only important thing is that we abide in His Spirit. It's more important than being American, more important than obedience to the state. It's the only thing that matters. One time I heard my good friend Jim Forrest say that war is simply murder wrapped in flags. Our work has always been based on the works of mercy, but we see that the works of mercy oppose the works of war. The works of mercy call us to feed the hungry, but war creates hunger. We're required to clothe the naked, but war burns the skins from people's bodies. We're called to welcome the homeless, but war creates millions of refugees who are homeless. And we're called to take care of the sick, but even sickness is a weapon of war. Do you remember the story that Jesus told about the rich man sitting and feasting with his friends while Lazarus sat hungry at the gate, the dogs licking his sins? Well, I believe that we are the rich of the world, and Lazarus is at our gate. And I'm afraid the day is coming when God will say, I was hungry, and you polluted the earth with your mines and your bombs and wars which starved the poor. I was thirsty, and you contaminated even the ocean and the waters of the earth with your hydrogen bombs. I was a stranger, and you made agreements with former allies who now are enemies to keep me in refugee camps. And you make weapons and profits for the rich, and the poor have no clothes to cover them. Yes, I came to the realization that what we need to do is to nourish, study, and cultivate nonviolence. This is the all-important issue. So we were very excited when Father Lewis began writing to us and sending us gifts of books and in cases of flavored toothpaste. You see, when the monks received a donation that seemed too luxurious, like flavored toothpaste, Father Lewis passed it on to us. And then even more importantly, he sent articles that we could print in the newspaper, like the article titled, The Root of War is Fear. Yes, we were very grateful for Father Lewis's contributions. He was such a well-respected writer, and it was good to have him on our side during the struggles of the Vietnam War. I did have to write to him one time to assure him that I understood that he was not claiming to be a total pacifist like me, but that he was writing about modern warfare, and about modern warfare not meeting the required moral conditions for a just war.
Dorothy and I found ourselves surrounded by war, and war again, and thousands of nuclear weapons of mass destruction, and eventually war in Vietnam. I was beginning to write more and more about issues of war and peace. After a number of letters to Dorothy, I finally sent the first of many articles to Dorothy to be published in the Catholic Worker newspaper. The first article in 1961 was titled, The Root of War is Fear. I began the article this way. At the root of war is fear. Not so much the fear that men and women have of one another, as the fear that they have of everything. It is not just that they do not trust one another. They do not even trust themselves. They are dominated by collective fears.
Father Lewis and I were in total agreement that we lived in a time surrounded by a kind of war madness. And that each human being, each Christian, instead of loving what we think is peace, must love others and love God above all. Above all. And instead of hating the people we think are our enemies, we must hate the appetites and the disorder in our own souls, which are the causes of war. He had said, if you love peace, then hate injustice, hate tyranny, hate greed. But hate these things in yourself, not in another. I wrote a lot about love, and in this article from Father Lewis that he wrote for us, he concludes, only love can exorcise the fear which is the root of all war. Only love can exorcise the fear which is at the root of all war. Yes, I believe that is so true. One of my favorite authors, Leo Tolstoy, wrote in his great novel, War and Peace, everything I know because I love. In the end, the one thing that matters most is love. Love makes all things easy. All sacrifice, all suffering is made easy for the sake of love. It is love which will solve all problems, family, national, and even international. This is the foundation of the Catholic worker movement. It is on this that we build. Sometimes, oh yes, sometimes I groaned within myself and thought about how hard it is to keep writing about love. In times of tension and strife which could at any moment become for all a time of terror. But then I would think to myself, well, what else is the world interested in? What else do we all want, each one of us, except to love and be loved? In our families, in our work, in all of our relationships. God is love. Love casts out fear. And even that most ardent revolutionist seeking to change the world, to overturn the tables of the money changers, is trying to make the world where it is easier for people to love, to stand in that relationship to each other. We want with all our hearts to love, to be loved. So it is important to remember that love and prayer are not passive, but a most active, glowing force. Yes, we go on talking about love. And there are Father Soshima's unforgettable words in the Brothers Karamazov. Love in practice is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams. What does this modern world know of love, with its light touching of the surface of love? It has never reached down into the depths, to the misery and pain and glory of love, which endures to death and beyond it. We have not yet begun to learn about love. Now is the time to begin, to start afresh, to use this divine weapon.
Yes, there's no way out of all of our struggles except to love our way out. And now I'm at the very end of my journey into love. Finally now, I'm coming home to your love, my Lord. Just about home at last now. Lord, we are all prodigals, self-exiled from our home in your love. In my end is my beginning. The gate of heaven is everywhere. Death in Bangkok. I had started my final talk in Bangkok, and I started it saying, you know, we are already one. We just have to find ways to admit that, to recognize that, and to celebrate it. We can't wait for all the words to be right. We can't wait for all of our intellects to agree, or it will never happen. Yes, love invites us to build bridges toward, instead of just walls against. At last. Yes, you, my God, had told me that you are mercy within mercy within mercy. And it is true. But how long we wait. How long we wait. Heaven, when will we hear you sing and say, the dark is done, and day laughs like a bridegroom in the smiling sky? At last, O heaven, I can hear your singing, and you're calling to me to join in the joy of the cosmic dance with you, our cosmic Lord and lover. Entering at last into the open arms of your love, my Lord. Really coming home at last and fully realizing the meaning of what you had reminded me of long ago and far away now during the time of my earthly pilgrimage, when you told me that you, my Lord, play in the garden of creation. And if we could let go of our own obsession with what we think is the meaning of it all, we might be able to hear your call and follow in your mysterious cosmic dance. We do not have to go very far to catch echoes of that dancing. When we are alone on a starlit night, when by chance we see the migrating birds in autumn, when we see children in a moment when they are really children, when we know love in our own hearts, or when we hear an old frog land in a quiet pond with a solitary splash. At such moments we catch a glimpse of your cosmic dance. Indeed, we are in the midst of it. And this dance of love is in the midst of us, for it beats in our very blood, whether we want it to or not. But we are each invited to forget ourselves on purpose, cast our foolish solemnities to the wind, and to join in the cosmic dance. Yes, each of us is invited to join in the cosmic dance.